Hi there, Molly D here again with JB&B's Deep Carbon Reduction Group, and today I'm back to tell you about a trending topic in New York City real estate: compliance options for Local Law 97 beyond building retrofits and upgrades. At this point in time, the law has had some time to sink in a little bit, and the rulemaking process is beginning to get underway. To update you briefly on some of the milestones that have happened since the last time we talked in our What is Local Law 97 video, the Local Law 97 Advisory Committee has officially been selected, and the city is in the process of developing programs to support building owners as they plan for future compliance with the law. Local Law 97 actually has several provisions for compliance options that building owners may want to consider as they plan to transition to a low-carbon future. Most building owners at this point know that energy reductions in buildings are a great way to address carbon. However, there may be instances where energy reductions can only get you so far. That's where knowing and understanding that there are other paths to compliance for Local Law 97 can be an important part of the carbon reductions puzzle. So let's start the conversation off with one of the easier compliance options, and that's the purchase of carbon offsets. For those of you who aren't familiar with the concept of a carbon offset, it's essentially a reduction in emissions made in one place to compensate for emissions made in another place. You can basically think of it as a trade-off. So if I'm a building owner and I produce 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide equivalent by combusting natural gas in my boiler plant, I can cancel out or negate those emissions by supporting something like a reforestation program that will ultimately remove and sequester that same amount of carbon that I produced. Carbon offsets are commodities and are available for purchase in voluntary markets from carbon offset vendors that will actually do the legwork of finding and investing your dollars in carbon mitigation projects. This seems like a no-brainer for Local Law 97, but beware, there are restrictions associated with this compliance path. First, it's only technically allowable right now between 2024 and 2029. And in addition to that, only 10% of a building's total annual emissions can be offset through these means. It's also worth noting that not all carbon offsets are created equal, and at some point in the future, there will be specific rules and regulations about the acquisition of carbon offsets that will come from the Department of Buildings. Next up, we're going to talk about using a clean distributed energy resource at your building to reduce overall annual building emissions. Per Local Law 97, a clean distributed energy resource is defined as an energy resource that uses clean and renewable sources to generate electricity. Examples would include hydropower, solar PV, geothermal, wind, etc. Another example that is applicable would be a system that's designed and operated to store energy, like a battery or a thermal storage system such as ice. The final compliance path that we're going to talk about today is probably the most complex to unpack, and that's the path of renewable energy credits, also known as RECs. A REC is essentially a market-based tool that represents the property rights to clean and renewable electricity. RECs are important because they're a means of tracking, accounting, and assigning ownership to clean, renewable, carbon-free electricity generation and consumption. Without RECs, you can't really know what the source of your electricity is in a shared grid. Could be coal, natural gas, chances are it's probably dirty. When a building owner purchases a REC, he or she is purchasing the rights to clean and carbon-free electricity that was generated through some renewable means like wind or solar. Per Local Law 97, a building can offset up to 100% of its annual reported emissions that come from grid-purchased electricity through the purchase of RECs. Again, this seems like an obvious solution for addressing the requirements of Local Law 97 without having to do serious work on an existing building. But there are some very specific requirements about where eligible RECs are created for them to be applicable to Local Law 97. Because this is a complicated topic, I think it's important to quote the law here. An eligible REC is considered by the New York Independent System Operator to be a capacity resource located in or whose output directly sinks into the Zone J load zone for the reporting calendar year. So let me walk you through that statement. 1. The New York Independent System Operator, often known as the New York ISO, is the entity responsible for managing New York's electric grid and its wholesale electricity markets. Simply put, they're the people responsible for dispatching our electricity to where it ultimately needs to go. 2. Zone J is how the New York ISO defines the 5 boroughs region of New York City. And 3. located in or directly sinking into essentially means that for a renewable energy credit to be eligible for Local Law 97, it needs to either be generated in the 5 boroughs region of New York City, or it needs to tie directly into New York City's Zone J load zone. So why does renewable energy have to either be generated in or directly sinking into the 5 boroughs region of New York City? Why can't building owners just go out and purchase renewable energy credits from Texas or California or upstate New York, where they're bountiful and inexpensive? And the reason is, this language in the law is essentially creating new demand for renewable electricity generation in the downstate region of New York, and specifically in New York City, by requiring RECs to either come from Zone J or tie directly into Zone J to count for Local Law 97, a demand for new renewable projects has materialized very quickly, which was ultimately the intent. All said and done, this very particular Zone J requirement in Local Law 97 feels difficult, and it is objectively difficult. The law is essentially trying to transition New York City's electrical markets towards a carbon-free future, so that building owners can use as much electricity as they need and not have to pay a carbon penalty. So that's the crash course and the various compliance options for Local Law 97 that are beyond building retrofits and upgrades. Some, or maybe all of these paths can ease the burden of carbon emissions reductions in existing buildings. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.